Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to what is the last of our sessions in our Let's Talk Dad series. So, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's session really is just a bite-sized session focusing on the risks that our teenagers could face because of exploitation and drugs. I'm Emma Stevens from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy, and tonight we are thrilled to have Nick Mellor with us from the Links team. Nick, do you just want to say hi and tell us what the Links team is?
Hello, everybody. Hey, Emma. I'm Nick. I am the manager of the Links team, and the Links team we're part of Children's Services, and we are the specialist adolescent service that support young people from the age of 11 up to the age of 18, where there are maybe worries about exploitation, which I could sort of talk about in a minute, or they may be going missing from home or missing from care, or maybe we've got some concerns about them online.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dick. And we've also got my colleague Chloe from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy with us tonight. Chloe, do feel free to chip in. And also we've got Claire Birch from the Community Safety Partnership managing the chat for us. So tonight we are just going to talk for 20 minutes, and I'm sure you can appreciate we could talk for much longer. So if after this session you want to hear more, you can just head to our YouTube channel, which has got several of our previous webinars and recordings for you to look at. And we're going to pop the link to that channel into the chat now. You'll also see that your mics and cameras are currently disabled, but please do use the chat bar to share any tips and experiences that you may have. But please don't disclose any personal details about your young people. And we might have a short amount of time at the end of the session if you've got any questions for us. So tonight's session is aimed at dads and male carers, but a lot of the advice will be generic for all parents. And we just want to acknowledge that becoming a good dad or a parent is not something you automatically know how to do. It's something you learn and practice. We're all first timers, aren't we, at this at some point? And our relationship with every child at every stage of their development is going to be different. Some of the things that Nick discusses tonight are going to be particularly challenging and may be difficult to hear, but it's important to acknowledge that they don't affect every family here tonight. But we do strongly believe in prevention and how being aware of the dangers and having open and early discussions with your teenagers is going to help keep everyone safe. These sessions aren't written for your teenagers, but do try and share a lot of tonight's content with them. You know, have a conversation. So Nick, I'm going to come straight over to you. Can you
Okay.
sum up for us what exploitation is? What does it mean and what are parents looking out for?
Okay. Before I do that, I just want to say very quickly to start is firstly, thank you for inviting me. It's really
You're very
important.
welcome.
And I think just to sort of add to what you're saying, Emma, it's that it's just really important to recognise as parents, it's tricky. I'm a parent myself, and my kids are slightly
Yeah,
older. I've got a 22-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter. And there's no rule book. I know it's a bit of a classic kind of thing that people say,
it's
and it's
true.
possibly the most hugely rewarding career in your life, and it's also mentally stressful, emotional, and it's a whole roller coaster. And it never ever feels in my 22 years of parenting. Some days I think I've got it spot on, and other days I think I'm doing really badly. And I think that's the experience for all dads and mums too. So I just want to sort of say, as parents, you are the experts, and I think it's really important to. I'm not an expert. I'm just someone that has been privileged enough to have a job where I've sort of worked with young people. So just quickly, my background is I'm a social worker by background, but always wanted to work with young people and adolescents. And I spent 10 years or so working in the substance misuse field with young people, drug and alcohol treatment. And in the last sort of 10 years or so, I've worked in the kind of missing and exploitation field. So going over to your question, what is exploitation? It's broad and it's a very, very broad term. And when we kind of think about exploitation, we sort of talk about different types of exploitation. So most commonly, people will think about sexual exploitation, and that became quite prevalent and people became aware of it 10 years ago or so because there were big inquiries in Rotherham and Rochdale, and there was actually sort of a TV series that was made off the back of it. And what we would class as child sexual exploitation, it occurs when, in this instance, it's a child where a child is taken advantage of, usually by an individual, it's usually by another adult, but it may not be, or a group of people. And there is usually coercion, manipulation, and the intention behind the perpetrator is to deceive that young person into sexual activity. And usually they will be doing that in exchange for something. And that exchange could be that the victim wants something, or they may be given money, or they may be given gifts, or going out in cars, that kind of thing. And the important thing about child sexual exploitation is that many children that are victims of sexual exploitation don't recognize their victim status. They would typically see themselves being in a consent-based relationship. Um, and we don't always see children that are being exploited by the stereotypical seedy person that hangs outside a school gate. It can be usually peer on peer, so it could be another young person is exploiting another, sexually exploiting another person. But I think the most important thing to say, as obvious as it is children don't consent to abuse. It's sexual abuse, and that's where it stops. Um, and sexual abuse and child sexual abuse doesn't always have to be what we class as contact offences. And forgive me, and as Emma said at the beginning of this, that my life is I talk about this all the time, and I realise it's very sensitive, but sexual offences and sexual exploitation can be non-contact. It can be through social media and sort of online.
We
So it's
talked, Nick, we talked a lot about healthy relationships last week
yeah,
and how
yeah,
people kind of ignore young people's boundaries and they don't
yeah,
give consent for things. So that sounds a
yeah.
little bit like what you're
Yeah,
talking about
absolutely.
with
Yeah, yeah,
exploitation.
yeah, absolutely. And then, so that's one type of exploitation. Another type of exploitation we would kind of look at is criminal exploitation, which again is a sort of a form of abuse, where again you've got those sort of similarities where a young person is being coerced into doing something. And a typical feature of exploitation is there's an imbalance of power. There's always manipulation, and the perpetrator is seeking to deceive the child, in this instance, into criminal activity. And that can be through coercion, through threats, through violence. And at times, again, the victims, the children, can think that they are in a peer group and they're having fun, and then the nature of that activity changes, and then we'll sort of see a change in kind of the presentation and how those perpetrators are towards those children. And again, it doesn't criminal exploitation doesn't always involve physical contact. It can again be it kind of be managed through social media. Um, and we would kind of see at the sort of the higher end. um, Young people can be exploited through things like maybe not even using things like weapons, but storing them on behalf of other people. And if they don't, then there'll be those threats of intimidation, violence, uh, forced labour, that type of stuff. Just going back to sexual exploitation a second is I think it's always important, if you're people aren't sure about the law around sexual activity, is about the Sexual Offences Act, which came out in it was 2003, and that actually provides really clear guidance for parents around. People should all know, like, the age of consent is 16, and it's illegal for any child to be in a sexual relationship with anyone under the age of 16. Um, so there's
That's,
that.
yeah, that's really helpful information, isn't it? Because I think this is something, even listening to you talk as a parent, hearing some of that for the first time is quite a scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really scary, and as I say, and I think it's really important to not be scared. And if there's one message that if you get from me talking today is, don't be frightened to talk to your children. So I can touch a little bit on online harm and stuff as well. But we know that through talking to our children, however difficult those conversations are, they're the most successful. Even if, and there's been times where I've sort of spoken to one of my children when I'm worried about something, and they would then say, well, it's really embarrassing. But actually, as they've got older, they've been able to say, well, yeah, that conversation was really orcs, but it was really helpful. And as parents, this is where it's difficult. There's nothing wrong if you don't even know, and it's something that you don't feel comfortable talking about. It's better to even just acknowledge it and say, look, I'm really worried about this, and look, can we talk about this a bit more? Because you're opening up the dialogue, even if they perhaps come back with some more colourful language. You're showing at the beginning that you care, you love them, that you're worried about them, and you want to do what you can to safeguard them, and that's okay.
And we talked, don't we, about parents are going through this for the first time as
Yeah,
well. There isn't a little
yeah,
guidebook, is there, that tells us
yeah,
what to do. So it's okay to say to them, I haven't got the answers. Let's try and solve this together and
yeah,
research this together to come to a
yeah,
to come to a
yeah,
solution.
yeah,
And we also talk about not having that. one-on-one conversation necessarily, that big sit down conversation. Sometimes you want to have that conversation when you're in the car or when you're cooking dinner,
Yeah.
because sometimes you don't want that eye contact to make it a big
Yeah,
deal, do you?
yeah, yeah. I mean, anyone that's worked in a job where they're working with children or even adults, or where you're trying to have those, or it's maybe with a family member, you want to have those really difficult conversations. I could certainly think back in my career, the best conversation I've ever had with young people is when they're in the passenger seat of my car.
Yeah.
Because of that, they you can still have it, and they don't have to look at you. And or always Mackey's is always quite a good drive as well.
Mackey's is always a winner.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Thanks, Nick. So, if parents are sitting there tonight thinking this will never happen to my children, or this could be happening to my children, are there any kind of common signs or anything that we should be looking out for, or anything that would raise a bit of a red flag thinking about exploitation?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the point again is as parents, you are the experts. You really are. So your sense of signs will be partly driven by that gut feeling as a parent, this doesn't feel right. But the common signs that I'd look out for, so say I were worried about a child possibly being exploited. So things that we might see are perhaps they're going missing. And that doesn't mean that they've gone missing for days on end. Perhaps they're just sort of sneaking out of the house and they're disappearing for a couple of hours here and there. And they're saying, "Oh, I'm just going to go and see a mate down the road." But it's all very, we don't really get the information they're
Yeah.
gone. And then they come back slightly later. Perhaps you're starting to see a slight different change in their appearance. Perhaps they're not taking so much pride in their appearance, or they appear quite flustered. It could be that maybe if they're going to school or college, are they leaving slightly earlier? Are they a bit more cagey about what they're doing? Are they coming home slightly later? Is there a sort of a bit of a pattern maybe on a certain evening of the week they're going out and they're coming back much later? And where this is difficult is that you have to put this in the context of teenagers go out and they socialize, and that's why this is can always be quite difficult. Um, Changes in peer group is often can be a bit of a sign as well. So if someone is maybe hanging around with people that are slightly older, that can sometimes be a bit of an indicator, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is. But if you're the parent of a, I don't know, a 13-year-old and they're hanging around with people that are 2 or 3 years older, then you would be right to be concerned and think, well, what's that about? Because
Yeah.
there's a different, we know from the sort of developmental stages of children and brain development stuff that there's a huge difference in even 6 to 9 months of one child over another. So those physical things, and also perhaps changes in behaviour, and that may not be at home. It could be about behaviour in school or whatever else they're doing in the evening. So perhaps if they were involved in a pastime before, like sport or whatever that was, club or society, and they've stopped doing that, and now they're going out more, and that again could be an
Yeah,
indicator.
I think what I'm hearing from you is that a lot of these things that you've just mentioned are normal teenage
Yeah.
behavior, aren't they? And it's, I think you said at the beginning, you're kind of the expert in your child, aren't you? So if these changes are vastly different to how they normally behave, or there are massive changes, that's the time maybe when you'd be thinking, oh, something's not quite right here.
Mm.
You know, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking if they start bringing expensive gifts home, if they've suddenly got a job, great, you absolutely
Yeah.
know why they're bringing all those gifts home. But if they haven't got a job and you're not giving them that money, then I'd be wondering where's all this new
Where's
stuff
this coming
coming
from?
from?
And from a sort of substance, a sort of a drug and alcohol point of view as well, you may see if you were concerned that perhaps your child may be using drugs, then maybe if they've got pocket money or they're earning a bit of money and the money's
Yeah,
going, where's it going? Or you may find physical evidence of drug use in bedrooms. So whether that would be evidence of tobacco or Rizzlers like smoking papers. Um, so I'm just looking at the chat. So yeah, it's popping up is about if someone's involved in drugs. I think it was saying
yeah,
they would like to be exploited. No, not necessarily, uh, because where we look at people that are the kind of high end of being exploited, usually there's a culmination of factors that would likely to mean that child is more likely to
yeah,
come to harm.
that makes
That
sense.
is clear. I think other things to think about is to think about online, and it's easier in many ways to talk about. And I mean this. I don't wish to word this incorrectly. physical harm or the world, the environment that we live in is easy to spot. So if someone is absent or if someone goes missing or is we've got concerns about perhaps their relationships and stuff, it's physical. We see it to some degree. It's much harder when we look at people's online world because
Mm.
they're secret. They are the things that people do on their phones that's in their hand or in their rooms with the bedroom door closed. And again, if there's one thing that I would encourage you to do as a parent is some parents, depending on if you've grown up and you've sort of developed with technology or you're a bit with me, and I'm not saying I'm a dinosaur, but I've had to learn there's nothing wrong again with having those conversations. So if you're concerned about perhaps your child's in their room all the time, they're online, and you come in and the laptop closes down or their screen disappears, is talk to them. Say that you're worried. What's going on? If you're really concerned, as the parent, you've got control over the internet. You can actually control how those sort of
Yeah,
servers work. A lot of social media apps have kind of features in them that mean they can actually help with filtering content. Um, and again, I kind of go to this point about keep on talking, keep on listening, say why you're worried, and be curious as well. And I think there's a sort of thing with the online world that the way the media portrays it is the online world is bad, and everyone the term we often hear it's the Wild West. Well, it isn't policed very well, and I make no kind of excuse for that. But there are many good things that come with the online world too. And for example, say maybe children that have difficulty forming relationships in the kind of physical world, the online world can be actually a really good and safe and caring space. So it's not all bad.
definitely.
So it's
And
really
I
important to explore that.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying, I might be wrong, but I think there is an online one of these, a Let's Talk Online
Oh, okay.
about online
Brilliant.
safety next week.
Yeah.
So I will get Claire or Chloe to pop the link in the chat for
Yeah.
everybody. But I guess, Nick, also it kind of brings it back a little bit to role modeling, doesn't it? And kind
Yeah.
of have high expectations of your teenagers and things like social media. If they see you constantly on their phone and you haven't got good privacy settings and they see your behavior online, that's what they're going to copy, isn't
Yeah.
it? So
Yeah.
there are little things you can
Yeah.
do as a
Yeah.
parent that makes such a big
Yeah.
difference. And I think one of those is definitely role modeling your own
Yeah.
behavior around that curiosity and
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah, we call it in our works. It's about the sort of social graces because I mean, back in the day where there was that sort of stereotypical thing where families sat at dinner together, and I know
Mm.
some families still do that, and you don't have the telly on, and now it's not unusual for families to all sit together if they're lucky in front of the TV with phones and looking at social media at the same time. And I think the kind of social graces stuff is if you all accept, right, okay, we're going to have an hour, half an hour, whatever it is a day where we all check in with one another,
Yeah,
how's your day? And it may sound a bit naff and cheesy, but it's so important because
it is.
they could be those sort of little golden nuggets where at the beginning you're a young person, you're worried about them, they don't tell you very much. And then one day they actually start to say, well, actually, I'm not very happy, or stuff isn't good at
Yeah.
school, or this is going on, or someone's really giving me a hard time online. So the conversation and the listening is the most important tool, which is why I'd say I am not an expert.
But
You are the experts.
but being a dad almost makes you an expert in that because I
Yeah,
think a lot of
yeah,
the time we're told to be a man or express our emotions. And actually, it's
yeah,
really good for our teenagers to see their dads struggling with something and having to
yeah,
work something out and being emotional about
yeah,
things. I think is really important to be honest, isn't
yeah,
it, with your
yeah.
children around things
Absolutely,
like
being
that.
really honest, and I've certainly done it with particularly with my son is that I'm very happy to default to I don't know how to do this and to play the idiot card, which works works really well because it's kind of empowering for that young person and actually it shows it's creating sort of I suppose parity and allowing your kind of child to think well actually my dad doesn't know how to do this and I'm going to show him and
Yeah,
I can be the expert here and that's good and I think as a dad as well it's really good to be in a place where you feel like I feel really upset about this or as you're sort of saying Emma it's to disclose a bit about how you're feeling is
yeah,
a key and if you're worried about your child, whether it's about exploitation or substance use, or there are lots of support services out there, but at the same time, the most powerful thing you can do is talk to them and let them hear why you're worried, because that is the beginning of that process of, we're going to try and help you here. I'm going to try and make some change.
Do you know what, Nick? That is a perfect ending, because we've done 20 minutes and we've left it by saying to everybody that actually, despite all the support services, all the resources that are out there, get to know your teenager, get to create that safe environment at home where you're all talking to each other. And that's half your battle, isn't it? So
Yeah.
thank you so much. I told you 20 minutes would go really quickly, didn't I?
My
So
pleasure. Thank you all for your
we are
time.
done. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We are going to ask you for some feedback if possible, please. Chloe is just going to put the link into the chat now. We do want to keep running these sessions if we can, so the more information you can give us about how you found them, please, the better. I think we are going to have a few minutes now just for if anyone does have any questions, because I appreciate that's a really quick session, but also all of our links are in the chat for you to look at our previous sessions. Do take care of yourself. Some of that's difficult to hear, isn't it? So I hope that you all do go and have a cup of tea, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you.